We're going to be in Psalm 107 this morning. It's amazing how the Lord orchestrates things. And as I get into the sermon, you're going to see that it's no coincidence Gary picked that first hymn that he picked. So the very first verse of Psalm 107, verse 1, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever." So the psalmist opens up the psalm with the main point. He comes right out of the gate and tells you what this is all about. Give thanks to the Lord right away. This is not just him saying, "Hey, give thanks. It's a good idea. You might like it." He's yelling at us to there's emphasis here. He's telling us, you give thanks. Do it right now. It's his earnest plea for us to give thanks to the Lord. Why? Well, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. We ought to give thanks to the Lord because of who he is and what he has done for his people, what he's done for us. Now, you might be here this morning and say, well, I recognize that God has done many wonderful things for me, but I don't quite get the extreme emphasis that the psalmist is putting on giving thanks. And if that's the case this morning, if that's what's in your mind this morning, then it could be that the reason this doesn't resonate with you is maybe you haven't truly experienced the amazing love of God to the extent that the psalmist has. But that's okay, because we have some here this morning that are going to tell you their experience with the redemption and love of God. The next couple verses, verse 2. "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so, whom he has redeemed from trouble and gathered in from the lands, from the east and from the west, from the north and from the south." So what's going to happen here is we are going to have some of the redeemed of God give their testimony of thankfulness to the Lord. We have four different people, four different kind of categories of things happening, four different scenarios, and each of these different people are going to give their testimony of what God has done for them. So in verses 4 through 9, we have the wanderer. In verses 10 through 16, we have the prisoner. In verses 17 through 22, we have the sick, the afflicted. And in verses 23 through 32, we have the almost shipwrecked. And the word almost is key. You're going to find out why. Now, these four scenarios may very well have been referring to real situations Israel was dealing with. However, they certainly refer to spiritual situations that we experience in life. And I guarantee all of you here this morning have experienced or are currently experiencing at least one of these four scenarios. And I say at least one because even though they are different, they have similarities and they overlap. And we're going to actually save the first one for last. So we're going to save the wanderer for the last one we're going to look at. So we're going to jump ahead to verse 10. So what does the prisoner have to say? Well, this is how the prisoner starts. Verse 10 and 11. "Some sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in affliction and in irons, for they had rebelled against the words of God, and they spurned the counsel of the Most High." Now, let's notice verse 11 first, okay? It says they're imprisoned because they rebelled against the words of God, and they spurned the counsel of the Most High. They spit at the counsel of God, basically. The reason suffering and negativity is in the world is because of sin. That's the cause. Everything that is negative in the world, all the way from a stubbed toe to AIDS, to the worst things you could imagine, all of that exists because of sin, okay? And the suffering we experience in life comes from our own sin, but also from the sins of others. Because sin has consequences, not just for the ones that sins, but there's consequences around people that sin, because sin doesn't happen in a vacuum. Sin affects everybody. And the negative consequences of sin can be natural consequences, right? I got angry on the road. I yelled at somebody next to me, and they, in their anger, rammed their car into me, and I rolled over a ditch, and now I'm in the hospital, or worse, they pull out a gun and shoot me. That's a natural consequence, right? But some consequences of sin are from God. And we see that next in verse 12. It says, So he, God, bowed their hearts down with hard labor. They fell down with none to help. One thing you have to understand is when God inflicts consequences on us for sin, it's out of love. You need to understand that. Because many people do not see their need for God until God makes them hit rock bottom. Paul talks about this a lot. In the book of Acts, Jesus tells Ananias that he's going to use Paul. Is it Ananias? I think. He tells Ananias, I'm going to use Paul. And then he says, I will show him how much he must suffer for my name. That's what he says about Paul. He's like, I'm going to make sure Paul suffers, so he understands. I've talked to so many Christians in my life that have gone through such suffering, and they have told me if it wasn't for their suffering, they would not have come to God. I've heard that over and over again. I found that true in my own life in difficult things. So when God disciplines us, when something happens that is not good or fun, God is not a child. He's not a petulant child where he's like, I don't like you, and he smacks us. God doesn't throw hissy fits. That's not what God does. There's a purpose for everything that he does and everything that he allows. And so this prisoner is in a dark cell somewhere. The darkness is so intense that it feels like death itself is standing right next to him. Not only that, but it says they are in iron. They're in chains. Some people wake up in life one day and realize that they are not free. They realize that they are enslaved to something. And they realize they cannot do what they would like to do in life because their slave master has total control. Paul talks about this in Romans 7. Paul says in Romans 7, verse 14, he says, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am of the flesh, sold under sin, for I do not understand my own actions. You ever been there? I don't understand what I do. He says, for I do not do what I want to do, but the very things I hate are the things I do. You ever been there? Like, why am I doing this? I don't want to be doing this. And the things you want to do, you can't do, right? He says, now, if I do what I do not want to do, I agree with the law, and that is good. So now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but I can't carry it out. Paul is saying, I want to follow God. I can't do it. Something is wrong. For I do not do the good that I want to do, but the evil that I do not want to do, that is what I keep on doing, Paul says. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I that do it, but sin that dwells in me. Paul's talking about being enslaved to sin. He's saying, when I do these things I don't want to do, it's not me. Sin has control. So Paul says that not only was he in the past not able to do good things that he should do, but he couldn't stop doing the things he knew was bad. And then verse 12 of Psalm 107, so he bowed their hearts down with hard labor. They fell down with none to help. So this is saying something God did, but there are times when we're enslaved to something and we're owned by something, and the thing that owns us forces us to do its bidding, forces us to do its work, and we feel like there's no way out of it. We feel like there's no deliverance, no way to stop. And we'll come back and find out what happens to the prisoner. Next, we have the sick or afflicted, Psalm 107, 17. Some were fools through their sinful ways, and because of their iniquities, they suffered affliction or sickness. So once again, we see sin rear its ugly head. This time, the people suffering are with affliction, and it appears to be really bad sickness, because verse 18, it says, they hated any kind of food they couldn't eat, and they drew near to the gates of death. There's many kind of afflictions that we can find ourselves experiencing. Some are physical, like in this scenario, this person is so sick, the sight of food disgusts them, they can't eat. Something that God has given us as a gift, they can't even have anything to do with. They feel like they're about to die. They're at the gates of death. But there's not just physical affliction in life. There's mental, emotional affliction. Some people are hit with such bad depression that nothing in life can bring them any sort of happiness. Nothing in life can make them feel anything. And many people that are afflicted with things do wish to just pass through the gates of death, to just get it over with and end the suffering. And we'll come back to the one who is sick. Now we have the almost shipwrecked. The almost shipwrecked. So verse 23. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. And they mounted up, the ship mounted up to the heaven, and then went all the way back down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men and were at their wits' end. So it's talking about some people, they're out on the sea doing business on some sort of shipping vessel, and they see what appears to be the beginning of a storm. A storm so bad, it says it raises the ship as high as heaven and all the way back down. And the people on the ship are staggering like they're drunk because the storm is so unsettling. Now, here's the thing. They're in a dangerous situation, no doubt, but it doesn't say any danger actually came upon them. I'm sure they assumed that the boat would get capsized or shipwrecked, or maybe they thought one of them would go overboard, but it doesn't say anything bad happens. It just says they get tossed around, but nothing bad actually takes place. So what is this about? What's going on here? Well, back to verses 26 and 27, when the waves caused them to be mounted up to heaven, they went down to the depths, and it says their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled and staggered like drunken men, and they were at their wits' end. It says their courage melted away. What's the problem here? Crippling fear and anxiety with no way to get yourself out of it. That's what's going on here. How many have struggled with that in their life? Crippling fear and anxiety. You see the circumstances all around you, and all you see is despair. And all you think is these waves are going to come crashing down, destroying me. And you just get submerged in an ocean of fear, and you have no idea what to do about it. And then finally, we have the wanderer. Back up to verses 4 and 5. Some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. So many people find themselves in this situation. What does the wandering immediately tell you? It means that they have no place to stay. It says they can find no city to dwell in. Many people find themselves wandering around looking for a place that they can call home, looking for a place to find peace, looking for a place to find rest. Wandering around feeling like you have nowhere to belong is exhausting. It gets to a point where you just can't do it anymore. Verse 5, hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. Every human soul craves something that will satisfy them. Every person longs for happiness, for joy, for true satisfaction, and we wander around everywhere hoping that something we find may give us some sort of solace in life. Some people run to money, some people run to relationships, some people run to drugs, some people run to gambling or entertainment or sexual activity or cults or false religions because they're craving something that they hope can make them feel whole for just 1 second. Just something. But nothing works. Nothing works. And at some point you feel so empty and so unsatisfied that you feel like you can't continue living like that. And in my notes, I have the first line of the hymn that we sang this morning. All my life long I had panted for a drink from some cool spring that I hoped would quench the burning of the thirst I felt within. This psalm represents the state of the human soul outside of Christ. In chains of sin, sickness, affliction, fear, anxiety, and craving something that you can't find. What can we do in these situations? Well, here's what's interesting. In each of these 4 situations, they all did the same exact thing in their misery. Verse 6, verse 13, verse 19, verse 28, all say the same exact thing. Then they all cried to the Lord in their trouble. They all did that. That's all we can do. All the time, that's all we can do. On our own, we have nothing. We have no power. We have no wisdom. We have no idea how to get ourselves out of the prison cells we're in. But there's someone who can get us out of that. What did the Israelites do when they were in Egypt? Do you remember? Exodus 2:23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. And their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And like I've been saying for the past 5 years, prayer is the only way to have the power to build the kingdom of God. There's no other avenue for power that God tells us but through prayer. But does God hear our cries for help when we call out? The verses in Psalm 104 say that each person cried to the Lord in their trouble. And then the very next sentence in all those verses say, and God delivered them from their distress. The prisoner. Psalm 107:13. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them out of their distress. He brought them out of the darkness, out of the shadow of death. He broke their chains. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works for the children of man. For he shatters the doors of bronze, and he cuts in half the bars of iron. What about the sick and afflicted? Verse 19, then they cried to the Lord in their distress. He delivered them from their distress. He sent out his word and he healed them and delivered them from their destruction. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. Let them offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and tell of his deeds in songs of joy. How about the almost shipwrecked? Verse 28. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. And they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. Now we have the wanderer. The wanderer cried to the Lord in their trouble. He delivered them from their distress. He led them by a straight path until they reached a city to dwell in. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love, for his wondrous works to the children of man. And then verse 9, I read verse 9 on Wednesday morning, and as soon as I read it, I knew this verse describes exactly what God is wanting us to proclaim to the people in this community. For he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. There is within every person, there is a craving for joy, for happiness, for satisfaction that the world cannot fill. No matter what you run to in the world, in the flesh, it will never satisfy. You have to keep going back to it and back to it because everything this world has is just physical. It's just physical, it's fleshly, but we are spirit beings. Our souls are the things that are craving satisfaction. So no matter how many physical, worldly things we run to, we find ourselves not being satisfied because the flesh can't satisfy the spirit. The spirit is not physical. The spirit is eternal. The spirit is endless. We need something more. This is what Puritan writer George Swinnock writes. He says, a man that is hungry finds his stomach craving something that he wants, without which he cannot be well. Give him music, company, pictures, houses, honor, and yet he will not be satisfied. Still his stomach craves. But set before this man some wholesome food, and let him eat, and his craving is over. So it is with man's soul as with his body. The soul is full of cravings and longings, exhausting itself, seeking to be satisfied. Our souls exhaust themselves, finding something that can fill them. Give the soul honor, money, pleasures of the world, and it will not be satisfied. But present God before the hungry soul, and it will be satisfied. Its insatiable desire for the world will now be cured. When the soul tastes manna from heaven, it will trample on the onions of Egypt. And that just reminds me of the story of Jesus with the woman at the well. He's talking to her. John 4, verse 12, she says, are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. And Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. As we look out in our country, as our world today, there's a lot of Christians that can be very pessimistic and think, oh, well, it's all going to hell now. Everything's going to hell. It's all downhill from here. Just hold on, hold on. I don't think that's true. I think we're about to see our finest hour as Christians. Listen to what Jonathan Edwards said. Jonathan Edwards was a 1700s pastor in Massachusetts. He says, it is evident from the scripture that there is yet remaining a great advancement of the kingdom of Christ in this world by an abundant outpouring of the Spirit of God, far greater and more extensive than anybody's ever seen. I believe God is going to do something that's beyond anything we've ever seen. And it reminds me of Isaiah 45. And you all are familiar with this verse because you probably recognize it from Philippians when Paul says, every knee shall bow and every tongue will confess. That's a quote from Isaiah. But when we often think that quote that Paul's using, well, he's talking about the end time, the end of everything. But when we go back in Isaiah, I don't think it's talking about the end. I think it's talking about now. Because in Isaiah 45, this is what God says. 45:22. Turn to me and be saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God. There is no other. By myself I have sworn. From my mouth has gone out in righteousness a word that will not return. And that word is, to me, every knee shall bow, every tongue shall swear allegiance. And he says that right after he tells the nations, turn to me and be saved, everybody, for there is none like me. I think that God is intending on bringing such an amazing revival that we've never seen. And I think he's calling us here to be a part of that. Because like I said, so many people around here that are lost in sin. There's a lot of people in this area, they're prisoners, they're wandering, they're afflicted, and they don't know how to get out of it. And God is telling us to tell them the cross of Christ is the only way that they can have victory over it.